When most people think of muscular Hollywood stars, they picture Steve Reeves in his sandals, or maybe Arnold Schwarzenegger flexing in the 1980s. But the truth is, old Hollywood was absolutely packed with actors who had real muscle, broad shoulders, thick arms, genuine mass, and nobody ever talked about it. These weren't just athletic guys who stayed in shape. These were legitimately jacked men whose physiques could compete with modern action stars, but they got buried under slimmer leading men, studio typecasting, or just bad marketing. Hollywood in the 1950s and 60s had a strange relationship with muscle. Sometimes the industry wanted cowboys and soldiers who looked like they could actually fight. Other times, they wanted elegant leading men who wouldn't intimidate audiences. That meant genuinely muscular actors often got hidden in secondary roles, or their bodies were downplayed entirely. Some of these men were competitive bodybuilders. Others were NFL linebackers or amateur boxers. A few were just genetic freaks who happened to walk into Hollywood with shoulders like barn doors. This video uncovers the 14 most underrated, forgotten, and shockingly muscular physiques in classic film history. These are vintage, strong actors whose bodies deserve to be legendary, but for one reason or another, they never got that recognition. Some were overshadowed by bigger names. Others appeared in films that didn't showcase their strength. And some were simply born in the wrong era, when Hollywood didn't know how to market real muscle. But when you look at the footage, when you see those shirtless scenes in high-definition restorations, the truth becomes obvious. These men were absolute units. Let's finally give them the credit they deserve. Clint Walker, the 6 feet 6 inches mountain of muscle Hollywood underestimated. Clint Walker stood 6'6" and weighed over 230 pounds of solid muscle, making him one of the largest men in Hollywood history. Before acting, he worked as a merchant seaman and did hard manual labor, which built his naturally enormous frame into something genuinely massive. When he landed the lead role in Cheyenne, audiences saw a chest so wide it looked like it belonged on a different species. Walker's ribcage was gigantic. His pecs were thick and full, and his arms hung long and heavy with real mass. In shirtless scenes, you can see his shoulders stretching the frame, his forearms looking like they could crush steel, and a torso that made other actors look like teenagers standing next to him. But here's the problem. Hollywood saw Clint Walker as a gentle giant, not a physique star. They marketed him for his height and his calm demeanor, completely ignoring the fact that his body was one of the most impressive physical specimens ever captured on film. He didn't pose in muscle magazines. He didn't get compared to bodybuilders. He was just Big Clint, the nice guy who happened to be built like a tank. That's why his physique remains one of the most underrated in old Hollywood muscle history. Walker's size wasn't exaggerated or enhanced. It was real, natural, and absolutely freakish for his era. Woody Strode, the sculpted warrior physique Hollywood didn't know how to market. Woody Strode was a former NFL player who brought a level of muscularity to the screen that looked like it belonged in a sculpture museum. His chest was broad and carved, his shoulders were perfectly capped, and his back had that V-taper that modern bodybuilders chase for years. In the opening fight scene of Spartacus, Strode appears shirtless, and his physique is so lean and defined that it shocks viewers even today. His muscle bellies were long and thick, his abs were visible, and his entire frame looked like it had been chiseled out of stone. Strode trained as a professional athlete, which gave him explosive power and genuine strength that translated perfectly to the screen. But Hollywood in the 1960s didn't promote black physique stars the way it should have. Despite having one of the best bodies in classic film, Strode's muscularity was rarely highlighted in marketing or publicity. He was cast as warriors and gladiators, but the industry didn't celebrate his physique the way it did for white actors with similar builds. That's why Woody Strode remains a forgotten muscular star, even though his body was easily one of the top 5 most impressive in vintage Hollywood. His chest alone could rival modern action heroes, and his overall conditioning was decades ahead of its time. Gordon Scott, Tarzan with bodybuilder-level mass. Gordon Scott played Tarzan during the late 1950s, and his version remains the most muscular interpretation of the character until the modern era. Scott was a former lifeguard and gym enthusiast who built his body specifically for the role, and it shows. His chest was thick and square, his arms were legitimately large, and his shoulders had real width. In films like Tarzan's Greatest Adventure, you can see bodybuilder-level mass on his frame. Not just athletic muscle, but genuine size that looked like it belonged in a competitive physique show. Scott's upper body was comparable to early bodybuilding greats like Reg Park, with a tight waist, broad lats, and arms that filled the screen. But despite his impressive build, he was completely overshadowed by Steve Reeves, who became the face of old Hollywood muscle thanks to his Hercules films. Scott's Tarzan movies didn't get the same level of promotion, and his physique was treated as secondary to the action and adventure. That's why most people don't realize how jacked Gordon Scott actually was. His torso was thick, his proportions were excellent, and his conditioning was sharp enough to stand next to any classic muscular actor. He deserves far more recognition as one of the strongest physique legends of the Golden Age. Mike Henry, the forgotten Tarzan who looked like a pro athlete. Mike Henry was an NFL linebacker before he ever stepped in front of the camera, and his physique reflected that background completely. His traps were enormous, his delts were round and full, and his upper chest had that explosive thickness that only comes from real athletic power. When he played Tarzan in the mid-1960s, he brought a level of muscularity that was visibly different from previous versions. This wasn't a lean jungle man. This was a football player in a loincloth, and his body showed it. Henry's arms were thick and powerful. His shoulders looked like cannonballs, and his overall build had that dense, compact strength of a power athlete. But his Tarzan films didn't get major publicity, and the studio skipped promoting his physique entirely. Most people don't even know Mike Henry existed, let alone that he had one of the most underrated muscular bodies in classic film. His build was legitimately impressive, with real mass and definition that would have made him a star if he'd been marketed correctly. Instead, he became a forgotten footnote, even though his physique could rival modern action stars who trained year-round with professional coaches. Robert Conrad, compact genetics that rivaled modern action stars. Robert Conrad stood around 5'8", but his shoulders were absolutely massive for his size. He was famous for doing his own stunts on the Wild Wild West, and in shirtless scenes, you can see why. His arms were round and full, his chest had serious thickness, and his waist was tight enough to make his upper body look even bigger. Conrad's genetics were insane. For a shorter actor, he packed on muscle that would make taller men jealous, and his proportions were legitimately impressive. The problem was his height. Hollywood looked at Robert Conrad and saw a tough guy who could fight, but they didn't promote him as a physique star because he didn't fit the tall, statuesque mold. That's a shame, because his shoulders alone were some of the best in classic film, and his overall build had that compact, powerful look that modern action stars like Jason Statham would later make famous. Conrad trained hard, stayed lean, and built a body that deserved more attention. His muscularity was real, his conditioning was sharp, and his upper body could rival anyone in vintage strong actors' history. He just needed better marketing. George Lazenby, Bond with the most surprisingly muscular upper body. George Lazenby was a model and martial artist before playing James Bond and on Her Majesty's Secret Service, and his physique was shockingly muscular for a Bond actor. His chest was broad and defined, his arms had real size, and his shoulders were thick enough to stand out even in a suit. In training scenes and behind-the-scenes footage, you can see genuine muscle mass that earlier Bond actors simply didn't have. Lazenby wasn't just fit, he was legitimately jacked, with a build that looked more like an athlete than a spy. But here's the tragedy. Lazenby only played Bond once, and then he disappeared from the franchise. That meant his physique faded from public memory almost immediately. Most people remember Sean Connery's suave elegance or Roger Moore's charm, but they forget that Lazenby had the most muscular upper body of any classic Bond actor. His chest could fill a screen, his arms looked powerful in action scenes, and his overall conditioning was years ahead of what Hollywood expected from a leading man. That's why his build remains one of the most underrated in old Hollywood muscle conversations. He had the goods, but he didn't get the career to match. Peter Lupus, The Mission, impossible strongman body nobody talked about. Peter Lupus was a legitimate competitive bodybuilder who played Willie Armitage on Mission. Impossible, and his physique was absolutely freakish. His chest was enormous, his arms were full and thick, his quads were massive, and his overall proportions were exactly what you'd expect from someone who posed in muscle magazines during the 1960s. Lupus didn't just look strong. He was strong, with bodybuilding credentials that put him in a completely different category from typical actors. But Mission, Impossible rarely highlighted his physique. The show focused on espionage and teamwork, not muscles. So most viewers had no idea they were watching one of the most jacked men in television history. Lupus never got the recognition he deserved as a physique star, even though his body could rival anyone in the golden age of bodybuilding. His chest alone was bigger than most actors' entire upper bodies, and his conditioning was sharp enough to compete on stage. That's why Peter Lupus remains a forgotten muscular star, buried in a role that didn't showcase his greatest asset. If he'd been marketed differently, he could have been a household name in classic film muscle circles. Alan Steele Sergio Chani, the Hercules physique overshadowed by bigger names. Alan Steele, whose real name was Sergio Chani, was an Italian bodybuilder who starred in sword and sandal films during the early 1960s. His physique was legitimately impressive. Thick shoulders, a broad chest, excellent arms, and a back that showed real development in Hercules-type roles. Steele looked like he could actually lift the weight he was pretending to carry, and his overall build had that symmetrical, balanced look that separates good physiques from great ones. But Alan Steele was completely overshadowed by Steve Reeves and Reg Park, who became the faces of vintage strong actors thanks to bigger budgets and better promotion. Steele's films were low-budget Italian productions that didn't get wide distribution, so his physique never reached the audience it deserved. Most people don't even know his name, let alone that he had bodybuilder-level mass and conditioning. His chest was thick, his proportions were excellent, and his muscularity was absolutely real. He just happened to be born in the wrong place at the wrong time, competing against legends who had Hollywood backing. That's why Alan Steele remains one of the most underrated physiques in classic, muscular actors' history. Brad Harris, stuntman physique, dense, strong, and photographed poorly. Brad Harris was a bodybuilder, stunt performer, and martial artist who worked extensively in German, Italian action cinema during the 1960s. His physique was dense and compact, with gymnast-style arms, powerful legs, and a torso that looked like it was built for real work, not just posing. Harris had genuine strength that came from years of functional training, and his muscularity was a kind that translates directly to performance, thick, hard, and incredibly well-conditioned. The problem was that Brad Harris never had a breakout Hollywood role. He spent his career in European action films that didn't get major distribution in the United States, so American audiences barely knew he existed. Even worse, many of his films were poorly lit or shot in ways that didn't showcase his physique properly, so even people who saw his movies didn't realize how jacked he actually was. But in behind-the-scenes photos and high-quality footage, you can see a legitimately impressive build that rivals any forgotten physique legend. Harris had the muscle, the conditioning, and the work ethic. He just needed better marketing and better camera work. Clint Eastwood early career. Lean frame but surprisingly muscular when young. Most people know Clint Eastwood as the grizzled cowboy or the stoic action hero, but in his younger years during the late 1950s and 60s, he was surprisingly muscular. Eastwood swam daily, did bodyweight training, and kept his body fat extremely low, which gave him visible definition even on his lean frame. His shoulders were very wide, his arms had real size and separation, and his torso had that slim-waisted, V-tapered look that modern fitness models chase. In shirtless scenes from Rawhide and Paint Your Wagon, you can see genuine muscularity that most people miss because they're focused on his tough guy persona. Eastwood's build was lean muscular, not bulky, but he had legitimate shoulder width and arm development that put him in a different category from typical leading men. The problem was that Hollywood marketed him for his attitude and his face, not his body. So his physique got completely overlooked. That's why Clint Eastwood's early muscularity remains one of the best-kept secrets in old Hollywood muscle history. He was more jacked than people realize, and his conditioning was excellent for someone who wasn't trying to be a physique star. Charles Bronson, hard, dense, working man muscle. Charles Bronson worked in coal mines before becoming an actor, and that background gave him the kind of real-world muscle that doesn't come from a gym. His chest was dense and thick, his forearms were huge, and his upper back had that powerful, compact look of someone who spent years doing hard physical labor. Bronson was also an Air Force veteran who maintained lifelong training discipline, which kept his body lean and functional well into his later years. In shirtless moments from films like A Mechanic and his earlier roles, you can see genuine strength, not bodybuilder mass, but the kind of hard, practical muscle that comes from a lifetime of toughness. Bronson's build was underrated because his persona focused entirely on his intensity and his presence, not his appearance. Nobody talked about how muscular Charles Bronson was because they were too busy talking about how terrifying he could be on screen. but his physique was legitimately impressive, with thick shoulders, powerful arms, and a torso that looked like it was carved from granite. He deserves recognition as one of the classic jacked actors whose body told a story of real strength. Stuart Whitman, big-chested, thick-armed leading man hiding in plain sight. Stuart Whitman was a former amateur boxer with heavyweight-level conditioning, and his physique reflected that athletic background completely. His chest was large and full, his arms were thick and solid, and his shoulders had real width. In films like The Mark and The Comancheros, you can see genuine upper body mass that most leading men simply didn't have. Whitman's build was legitimately muscular, not just fit or athletic, and his proportions were excellent. But Hollywood marketed Stuart Whitman as a straightforward leading man, not an action star or physique actor. That meant his muscularity was treated as secondary to his acting, so most people never noticed how jacked he actually was. His chest alone was impressive enough to stand out in shirtless scenes, but the studio didn't promote it and audiences didn't talk about it. That's why Stuart Whitman remains a forgotten muscular star, even though his body could rival anyone in the Golden Age physique legends category. He had the size, the conditioning, and the presence. He just needed better marketing. Guy Madison, the cowboy star with an unexpectedly solid torso. Guy Madison was a war veteran who trained regularly and maintained a naturally strong, athletic build throughout his career. His shoulders were broad and powerful. His chest had real springiness and thickness. His arms looked like they belonged on someone who did serious physical work. In shirtless scenes from films like The Command and Bullwhip, you can see genuine muscle mass that most cowboy stars didn't bother building. But Hollywood marketed Guy Madison almost entirely for his handsome face, not his muscular build. He had the looks of a leading man, which meant his physique got buried under publicity about his charm and his smile. That's a shame, because Madison's upper body was legitimately impressive, with real width and thickness that deserved more attention. His shoulders would fill a screen, his chest had substance, and his overall conditioning was sharp enough to stand next to any vintage strong actor. He just happened to be good-looking enough that studios didn't think they needed to promote his muscles. That's why Guy Madison remains one of the most underrated physiques in classic film history. Jeff Chandler, the silver-haired leading man with surprising upper body size. Jeff Chandler was known for his silver hair and his dramatic presence, but what most people don't realize is that he had a surprisingly muscular upper body. Chandler trained regularly and kept his chest and arms well developed, which gave him visible size that stood out in action and adventure roles. His torso was wide and thick, his shoulders were powerful, and his overall build had that visually imposing quality that makes an actor look genuinely strong on screen. In films like Sign of the Pagan and Pillars of Sky, you can see real upper body strength, not bodybuilder mass, but legitimate muscle that showed conditioning and dedication. But Hollywood viewed Jeff Chandler as a dramatic leading man, not a physique star, so his muscularity was completely overlooked. Nobody talked about his chest, nobody mentioned his arm, and his build faded into the background of his other qualities. That's why Chandler remains one of the most underrated classic muscular actors in vintage Hollywood. He had the goods, but the industry didn't care, and history forgot how jacked he actually was. Hollywood's relationship with muscle has always been complicated. Some decades wanted rugged cowboys who looked like they could wrestle a bull. Others wanted elegant leading men who wouldn't intimidate the audience. That meant genuinely muscular actors often got buried under studio politics, bad marketing, or simple typecasting. The 14 men in this video all had legitimate physiques, broad shoulders, thick arms, real mass. But for one reason or another, they never got the recognition they deserved. What's fascinating is that these forgotten physiques are now getting rediscovered. High-definition film restorations are revealing muscle definition that old prints couldn't show. Fitness nostalgia is driving fans to study classic frames and compare vintage strong actors to modern bodybuilders. And the internet has made it possible to dig through archives, find shirtless scenes, and finally give credit where credit is due. These men weren't just athletic. They weren't just in shape. They were legitimately jacked, with physiques that could compete with actors who train full-time with nutritionists and personal trainers. Clint Walker's enormous chest, Woody Strode's sculpted back, Peter Lupus's competitive bodybuilding mass. These are real, undeniable examples of old Hollywood muscle that deserve a place in the conversation about the greatest bodies ever captured on film, whether they were overshadowed by bigger names marketed poorly, or simply born in the wrong era. These 14 men built physiques that remain impressive even by today's standards. It's time to stop forgetting them. It's time to recognize that the golden age of cinema wasn't just about great acting and great stories. It was also about real, muscular, powerful men whose bodies told their own stories of strength, dedication, and genetic greatness. These are the 14 most underrated physiques of old Hollywood, and they deserve their moment in the spotlight.